My friend, Sherlock Holmes, was one of the cleverest and most important detectives in England some years ago. The police often asked him to help them if they were stuck on a case. My name is Dr. Watson, and I helped Holmes with many of his cases. I kept careful notes and wrote about them in great detail. In 1891, Holmes and I had to leave England on a very dangerous case. While we were away, Holmes disappeared. Everyone thought that he was dead. I was very sad at the news. Then, one day in 1894, Holmes returned to England. He was not dead. At first, this was a secret, because he was working on another case. But when the case was finished, we were able to work together again. Holmes was now a better detective than ever before. This little book is called The Return of Sherlock Holmes. The stories come from my notes of the cases that we worked on after his return. 3 of the best cases are here. The 6 Napoleons, the Norwood Builder, and the Golden Glasses. I hope you will enjoy reading them. The 6 Napoleons. Mr. Lestrade, a detective from Scotland Yard, often visited my friends Sherlock Holmes and me in the evening. Holmes enjoyed talking to Lestrade, because he learned useful facts about Scotland Yard, London's most important police station. Lestrade liked these visits too, because Holmes was a good detective. Holmes always listened carefully if Lestrade had a difficult case. He often helped Lestrade. Yes, they were. Well, said Holmes, why did the man choose these 3 busts? I'm sure that there are hundreds of other busts in London. I think the thief was only interested in the busts, not in Napoleon. That's possible, Lestrade replied. But can we be sure? There is no other shop that sells busts in that part of London. Perhaps the madman lives in that area and began with the nearest busts. What do you think, Drive, Watson? Can someone hate Napoleon so much? Yes, it's possible, I said, and I told them some interesting examples from the history of medicine. But, I said, how did this madman know where these 3 busts were? It's very interesting, said Sherlock Holmes. Please tell us, Mr. Lestrade, if you learn more. Next morning, I was dressing when Holmes came into my room. Lestrade wants to see us immediately, he said. He's at a house in Kensington. I quickly finished dressing. Who is the dead man? Asked Holmes. We don't know, Lestrade answered. He had a cheap street map of London, and a photograph of a very ugly man in his pockets. There was a small knife near him. But I don't know if he was killed with that knife. What about the bust of Napoleon? Asked Holmes. We found it quite near here, in the garden of an empty house, said Lestrade. It was broken, like the others. Lestrade took us to look at the broken bust. Mr. Harker stayed at home. He was beginning to feel better, and he wanted to write the story for his newspaper. We soon arrived at the empty house. The pieces of the bust were lying in the grass by the garden wall. Holmes picked up some pieces and looked at them carefully. What do you think? Said Lestrade. Holmes looked at him. There's a lot more work for us to do, he said, but there are some interesting questions here that we must think about. For example, Why did a man kill someone for a cheap bust like this? And if he only wanted to break the bust, why didn't he break the bust? Garden of the other house was too dark. That's true, said the detective. Then he asked, but how does this help us, Mr. Holmes? I don't know yet, my friend answered, but I'm going to think about it. What are you going to do next, Mr. Lestrade? I want to find out who the dead man was. I need to know why he was in Kensington last night. Then I'll know who killed him outside Mr. Harker's house. Isn't that a good idea? Perhaps, replied Sherlock Holmes, but it isn't my way. So, what are you going to do? Asked Lestrade. I'll do things in my way, and you can do things in your way, said Sherlock Holmes. Then we can talk about the case together later. Then he added something surprising. If you see Mr. Harker, please tell him this. I'm sure that a dangerous, Napoleon-hating madman was in his house last night. Lestrade was surprised. Do you really think that's true? Holmes laughed. Not really, he said, but I think the readers of Mr. Harker's newspaper will be interested. We must go now, but please visit us in our rooms in Baker Street at 6 o'clock this evening. Until then, can I keep the photograph that the dead man had with him? After you come to Baker Street, you must come out somewhere with me. Goodbye, and good luck. Mr. Harker's past was from Harding Brothers' shop in the High Street, so Sherlock Holmes and I walked there together. Mr. Harding was not there. Holmes was not pleased by this. We'll come back in the afternoon, he said to Mr. Harding's assistant. And now, Watson, let's visit Mr. Morse Hudson's shop. Dr. Barnickhart bought his busts there. Morse Hudson was very angry about the broken busts, but he answered all Holmes's questions. The busts were made by Gelder and Company in another part of London, he told us. I can't give you more help than that. But when Holmes showed him the photograph from the dead man's pocket, he cried, "That's Beppo." Who's Beppo? Asked Holmes. He's an Italian. He worked in my shop for a time, a useful man, but he left last week. I don't know where he went. He left 2 days before the bust was broken.